welcome back to Timeless Topics. In this episode, we discuss the importance of stepping out to create and support your community. Things like learned helplessness and a scarcity mindset keep us believing that an individual cannot impact a system, but y'all know that we don't subscribe to that over here. The power of human connection and community is stronger than systems that promote hierarchy and supremacy. We are so grateful you are here with us. Let's jump into the conversation.
I thought of you ladies last night because I went to a viewing session for a documentary, Freedom House. Have you heard of Freedom House?
No.
Okay. So
All
this
right,
is what I
again.
found out. It is the first ambulance paramedic service in the US, and it was founded here in Pittsburgh. Founded by a group of predominantly Black men, but also some Black women in the 1960s because they realized that there was a need. Because what they had at that point in time is if there was a medical emergency, the police would come, would pick up the person and would transport them to the hospital. But sometimes in these communities, the Hill District is one of the predominantly Black areas here in Pittsburgh, that they would not come, they would not attend to them in the same way, or else, one of the men in the documentary shared the story of his mother falling out, calling police saying she's drunk, we won't transport her. He and a friend ended up taking her themselves. She died several days later of a stroke, right?
Oh, Lord.
And so they felt this desire to help the community. And at the same time, it's so interesting. At the same time, the physician who developed CPR realized that you could do mouth to mouth, had moved to Pittsburgh. And he was like, hey, we take this, we partner up, we start this outside of hospital and we can save lives. And so they founded this ambulance service and ran it for years in this district. First year, they said they got 6,000 calls,
Wow.
right? Transported these people to the hospital, met the man, shook the hand of the man who performed the first endotracheal intubation outside of a hospital setting here in Pittsburgh, right? In the US, first one ever. And so it's their story. So speaking of people stepping out, speaking out, right? Because they did this. And these were men that, in their words, were considered unemployable because they were Black. Some of them had been incarcerated. They were not doctors. They were not nurses, right?
Yeah.
But they got the training and education from these physicians who supported them and grew them and made them to be who they are. And they had to step out on faith, right? They had to speak out. And even now, the fact that so many people don't know about them is because they said, 1975? People in the richer parts, the white parts of Pittsburgh said, hey, why are your people doing better than ours? Wait a minute. Why don't we have this?
Yeah.
And the mayor stepped in and shut it down and took control of it, right?
Oh my
Because
God.
we can't have this for just our Black people, right? We can't have this in the poor parts of Pittsburgh. So we're going to take it, which, okay, yes, to some degree, should be equitable in all ends. However, don't shut down what started it.
Right.
Right. And that's what they did, and have since tried to erase the history of it because how many people don't know. But also the book of the Black Angels, right? Have you read that one?
No.
Oh, okay, that's a good one too. So it is about the Black nurses during kind of the surge of TB here in the US and how they were the ones who stepped in because nobody else wanted to do it. They realized you're going to get TB, you're going to die if you're caring for these patients. So again, just from my perception and reading of the book, that they would go to the South, get these nurses who were underpaid, not being hired in places in the South, and take them up north and say, we got a job for you, right? And that was part of the whole origination of the National Black Nurses Association because they were not allowed to be part of the regular Nurses Association. So they had to form their own. So good books, good history lessons when we really think about people stepping out, stepping up,
Yeah.
really trying to make a voice, being a legacy for
Yeah.
the rest of us to come behind, right? And then you hear how some of these, I don't want to call them stories because they're not stories, but some of these examples maybe have been squashed, have been
Yeah.
hidden, aren't talked about,
Yeah.
right? And it just made me stop and think about this conversation of putting your neck out and
Yeah.
stepping out. And had they not stepped out, how things would be different.
One, 1960s, 1970s. This was not
Yes.
300 years ago, right?
Right.
This is within the lived memory and recollection of a lot of people, right? Like this
Hmm.
is a lived thing that is still current. It's kind of how I feel about when people always show pictures of Dr. King and they're always in black and white. You're like, no, there's people who remember seeing him that are still alive, you
Hmm.
know? We
Hmm.
like to talk about it like it's a bygone era, but not, no, it's not,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that stood out was the just the underpinning that these systems are not going to save us. The community is going to save each other,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
the community has to step up and say, okay, until we can get that bigger tipping point, I'm going to take care of me and mine. And then you're going to take care of you and yours. And then we're going to keep expanding that definition until eventually we can get to hopefully an equitable thing. Because like you said, sure, why can't the richer, whiter, XYZ, whatever, community also have an ambulance service?
Yeah.
Sure, you should have one too. But that doesn't mean that you have to take mine. Like you have to take mine
Right.
away so that
Right.
you could have one. Because a lot of times that's how people see equity work is, well, then that means I have to take it from somebody. And I was like, a lot of these resources
No.
are not finite. Like we're not
No.
talking about like a cup of water that is being distributed across a group of people. This scarcity mindset is a tool, honestly, of white supremacy and
Yeah.
colonialism, right?
Yeah.
To make you
Yeah.
think that there's only so much of this.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason why both can't exist, right? Rather than thinking that you have to choose a binary of this group gets and this group doesn't get.
Yeah.
And I think that that's very timely in the world that we find ourselves in from all the different aspects, whether we're talking about healthcare or greater systems,
Yeah.
is this mindset that just because I need something doesn't mean I have to take it out of your hand to have it.
Right. Right. We both can have this simultaneously, and that's where we really missed the boat. This is so interesting because I myself, Tracy and Jess as well, I think, I went for a walk before our call, and I was trying to figure out what are we going to talk about today, and I had just, so I'm down here in Florida, um, caretaking for my mom, and my brother was here a few days before, at the beginning of the week. My sister, who my mom lives with, is on a holiday, much needed, break. So we're sharing the responsibility. And so yesterday was kind of like the handoff. And my brother he's a lovely human, different kind of a person. And he took me aside and he said to me, I know you're really upset about what's happening in the world. I know it's really getting to you, but you have to remind yourself that you can't change this. You're just one person and you just got to let it all go and stop working yourself up. And I knew he meant this in a good way, And so this morning when I was out walking, thinking about our call and stuff, and I was thinking about what he was saying, this idea of I don't know if this is the right label, you'll tell me. This learned helplessness was the idea that kind of bubbled up in my head, and trying to like rewind the tape on how many times over the course of at least my life I didn't realize that's what it was at the time, but I think that's the right label. And I think it's an attempt, as you said, Jess, too, it could be a tool of white supremacy. I wouldn't be surprised, definitely a tool of colonialism, um, to just like give up, you can't do anything. And that lots of people buy that, that they buy into that idea. And, um, and I think what we do here collectively is we don't. We're planting so many seeds. I mean, with these spicy conversations, I love that description. Um, we plant seeds that I think do invite folks to think beyond what what you can do by just showing up as who you are, by networking with a small community, it does create a ripple effect, and it does make a difference. I mean, that beautiful story, Trace, that you just shared about the EMT origins, and all of the other challenges that we deal with every day, it can feel so freaking daunting, when but again, you kind of remind yourself, like, how do you eat an elephant, right? It's one bite at a time. And I think what we do here is show people how to do that we acknowledge that it's big and huge and scary and can feel totally out of bounds, that people are still trying to find a path. There's always another way. Just feels yeah, like less disempowering than just kind of succumbing to, you're right, I'm not making any difference and I'm just going to give up, kind of a mindset.
No, because in hearing you talking about that, right? That learned helplessness, I agree with that kind of title and description of it. And there's definite tenets in racism, discrimination, like historical aspects, right? I mean, I think people maybe don't know the words for it, but when you think about things like public housing or WIC or
Yeah,
things of that nature, right? And when you think about the connotation that on some levels, again, never trying to offend anyone, but on some levels, yes, helpful. Yes, needed. But on the other level, look, let me give this to you because you can't do it,
right,
right?
right.
You can't figure it out on your own. So
Hmm.
let me give this to you. And then you get in the sense of, oh man, I really can't do it. So I have to rely
Yeah.
on this handout, right?
Hmm.
And it becomes this vicious cycle where you
Yes.
just can't figure out how to get out of it. I think about our young moms, right? Our adolescent moms who come in and have these babies, and someone tells them, you know what? You've had this baby. You're not going to graduate from high school. You're not going to be able
Right,
to get whatever degree you want. Like
right.
this has completely ruined your life. And as you start thinking, ah, man, it's ruined my life. Right
Hmm.
now, me, on the other hand, I had people in my corner saying, huh, okay, you want to go to Chapel Hill? Bet. We got you. You will graduate. I remember vividly my mother and my father saying to me, you got into Chapel Hill, you will graduate from Chapel Hill. And what? Right? This
Hmm.
changes nothing. We
Yeah,
got you. You will make it out. And that is why I have the 3 degrees that I have, despite the fact that I had a 1 year old and then a 4 year old and then a 10 year old riding right along beside me when I
hmm,
graduated with those degrees. But it was
yeah,
because nobody allowed me to sit and wallow
yes,
and think you're helpless,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Life happens, circumstances are what they are. I will assist you as you need, but once you get on your feet, keep rolling. And
yeah,
that's why I speak to people now like, okay, cool, bet. We're in the dumps right now, but when you get back up, keep it rolling and bring somebody else up behind you.
yes, yes,
But that's my philosophy.
yeah. I'm
Well, you're really
right there
speaking
with
to
you.
resilience,
Yeah.
but resilience not in
Hmm.
the like buzzword way, but in the like actual way, right?
Yeah.
Of
Hmm.
like, yes, this is hard. We can validate that this was not ideal and that this is challenging, but I can also tell you that we're going to get to the other side, right?
Yeah.
Because you have a team full of people that are going to help you get there. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's going to be hard for you. Yeah, you've got a lot of hard work. I'm not going to be Pollyanna, about that.
Yeah.
But I also am going to say, but I got you, right?
Yeah.
And we are going to walk across that stage together, kind
Yeah.
of mentality, because that's the community that I feel like is just missing.
Yeah.
Like, no matter how connected we are, like social media and globally, like we're more connected really than ever, arguably, but we're actually more disconnected at the same time because everything's become this kind of like a parade, right, of expectations, and so disjointed in communication that it's like almost a competition of who looks
Hmm.
the happiest, who looks the most successful, without actually tapping into, but what is your actual experience right
Yeah.
now? Are you killing yourself emotionally or mentally or anything to be able to meet this ideal objective that isn't real?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember talking to some kind of younger people just in my personal life and just being like, well, I want to be a travel nurse and I want to go and travel the world and do all this. And I was like, okay, like that's an aspirational thing that you can do. How do you think that happens? And they immediately start talking to me about these influencers and everything, which I think those people can do good things, right? I don't think it's all by baby out with the bathwater kind of thing,
Mhm.
but it's also just recognizing like, okay, but there's work that has to be done with that. There's degrees that have to be done. There's experience that has to be gotten. There's a certain amount of maturation that has to occur. Like you don't just walk in and decide and then get like handed a crown that like this is your
Mhm.
life now.
Yeah,
And I don't say that to dissuade you from it. I say it to prepare you for the hard
yeah.
work that's needed, but also the hard reward that you're going to get on the other side
Mhm.
if you're able to figure that out, but not by yourself, with
Yeah,
access to whoever can help support you in the
yeah,
process.
yeah. I love that you mentioned about the social networking and that aspect of it too, because I think we've kind of swung, it seems to me, like swung way over to that kind of end of the spectrum and thinking that that's the be all and end all. And so we have more numbers, we have more data that says we have all of these connections, but we've now lost our connection to the human aspect of it, right? Thinking like it's a whole different experience for me to share some stuff on a social platform or through a text message or something than be sitting right next to you and telling you maybe, what it is that I'm really going through. It's completely different. It's completely vulnerable, but you use this kind of expression just a few minutes ago. There's a hard, awesome return on that connection in that moment that I will never really experience in the social networking world. And so I think we tend to do this, right? We tend to kind of like, here we are, and we see this big shiny object, and we go, "Oh my God, let's all get over there. That's where it all is at." And then you're like, "Oh fudge, this isn't it." I guess we have to kind of find, that place that balances it, because no babies out with the bathwater. What is the blend that helps keep me grounded to my humanness and to my fellow human being, and other beings in the world? What helps me stay grounded to that, because that helps me stay real, stay human, stay integrous to who I really am, instead of painting this imaginary profile of who I wish I was, kind of a thing, and throwing that out in the world. But it is wicked hard, and I think, and I also think it's the intention of the powers to be and all this other kind of stuff, because when we are disconnected, and when we kind of have these false idols of what connection really is, it makes us think we're not missing anything, and that actually keeps us disempowered.
We're going to change the world, right? And I think the thing
Somebody
is
has
that
to.
so many, right? But I
Yes.
think that so many people think that you have to be that big, huge influencer with, I don't even know how many followers. I'm
Yeah.
too lame to even know, but like thousands and thousands of followers, right? But honestly, if our conversation touches one person and one person says, because of something that I heard, I took a leap. I stepped out and I went and I spoke to my colleague who is so different than me. But I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna have a conversation with them. And you build a conversation.
Mhm.
If one person takes what we've talked about and looks at a family in a slightly different way and helps that family have a different outcome, have a different perception, have a different relationship with their healthcare providers, then we've done what we need to do.
Mhm.
And we've changed a tiny piece of the world, but
Yeah.
we've still changed the world.
We talked about this before, but I think that's the hope, like the hope that is based in action that you
Mhm.
have to keep tapping into, right?
Yeah.
Of like, if I do the brave thing and then I get two other people to join me and do the brave thing, and then we get two other people and we just keep going and going and going, then we
Yeah.
are building community. It might not look like community engagement, numbers that you can report out. If I get this many whatever's on, LinkedIn or all those things, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it's actually tangible, like real time, human to human kind of connections, which these systems of, you can almost pick any one of them that you want to,
Yeah.
have designed us to not care about anymore,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that we have to only care about what our engagement numbers are. And you're like,
Yeah.
but that's such a short-sighted way to look at human interaction, you
Yeah.
know? Because if you think about it, even just from the concept of, I mean, we're going to take it way fundamental, but think about it from a concept of how many words a baby hears, right?
Yeah.
You could sit them in front of the TV and they could hear a lot of words, right? You could have a YouTube video playing, reading them, huge tomes of books, right? That are categorically classic literature that is just going to enrich their brains, right? But that is not the same as having human to human engagement
Yes.
and interaction and like reciprocal
Yeah.
kind of communication. Think of like the Brazelton research and all of that, right?
Yeah.
Of being able to say that actually the serve and return is what benefits them so much
Yeah.
more than just the frank listening to a
Hmm.
dictionary, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the oversimplification of that, the AI of it all says, but you said words. So
Yeah.
I'm going to give you really fancy words,
Yeah.
right? Without realizing that we're all humans in the end and we all are wired for connection in the end.
Yeah.
And so if we're not meeting those connection needs, then by default, we're, kind of neglecting
Yeah.
those needs. And arguably neglect is worse even than abuse, right? Because at least with
Hmm.
abuse lens, you're a person who matters in this scene, even if it's not in a safe way.
Yeah.
But in a neglect lens, you don't even register to
Yeah.
somebody.
Yeah.
And that invalidation gets coded in your nervous system,
Yeah.
you know? And it becomes really hard to convince people that their nervous system is wrong because that's their lived experience.
Exactly. It's meaning making is what you're talking about. And meaning making, I mean, good meaning making is grounded in relationships. And that sense of, you know, that sense of self and self-worth is an expression of how I feel connected to others. And I mean, it's so complex and crazy. You think about even the child that um, tries to make meaning out of their connection to a caregiver who may be abusive, right? I mean, like that the fundamental piece of it is the connection. You go back to, is it the Harry Harlow experiment, and the monkeys, and they went for the fuzzy wire frame that didn't give milk, and that, and they'd go over to the wire one that gave the milk, but they needed that sense of security, that sense of warmth, and I mean, love for, you know, lack of any other words, that really step up to the plate. And so I think you're on point, Jessi. I mean, that's really what it's all about. But we've lost, I think, to some extent, our skill set in how to create those relationships and sustain that skill set for relational stewardship. I was thinking about, like, child rearing and stuff. So I'm here, with my mom, um, bringing back lots of, memories and stuff like that, as things do. And, kind of that idea of, like, if you want me to be a certain way, then you have to role model that way. You can't just tell me to be and do something that you're not being and doing in the moment, because I will be and do, what I hear will be like the lowest thing on the totem pole. I be and do what I see and live, and so, just really helping people understand that it's in the role model, it's in what you just said, the lived experience. If I'm not living an experience of love and safety and connectedness, you can't talk to my cortex and make my cortex buy that line if that's not what I experienced. And so and that applies for everything, right? That applies for my own, mothering and that whole story, um and hindsight, 2020. But also, like, how I care for babies and families in the course of the work that I do, how I care for my grandchildren, how I interact with other humans, because it's not my default setting, then it becomes more effortful, and there are, you run the risk of having more lapses of not showing up as the better expression of yourself that you'd like, because of these things. But I think when you're curious and you start to notice and question these things, it does help amp up your capacity for awareness, and maybe even building some more skills around attuning to those things. But then, gee willikers, right? Then you have to really dial up, your presence, and all of those other elements. But I think having these kinds of conversations allows us to kind of peek behind the curtain, you know, for ourselves, as you see the curtain being pulled for behind, the curtain being pulled for other people.
It kind of just made me think like another theme we frequently come back to is just the role modeling, like be the
Mm-hmm.
change,
Mm-hmm.
and people are going to think you're delusional. People are going to think that you're Pollyanna. People are going to think that you're too much, right? Like think of all the different words we've used even to acknowledge our own, what seems like radical ideas, even though they shouldn't be.
Right.
Because I was thinking about it, because I was talking, transparency, I was talking with a new therapist, and he was like, "You described yourself as too much. What does that mean?" I was like, "Well, soon, sir, you will learn." But also, I've learned that I have to preface that with people, because then
Mhm.
they're like, "Oh, she did say she was a lot. So now that I'm feeling a lot, okay, I was warned by this." But
Mhm.
again, that is a lived experience, learned experience for me
Yeah.
to be like, "Hey, hey. I'm going to make things weird and deep and uncomfortable, but hopefully this is going to come out good for both of us," right? But I can very quickly get a read on like, oh no, this is okay. You're not the one. Cool. That's fine. You can go about it. I was at a conference recently and someone was like, oh, like, I think you're really interesting. I was like, yeah, I'm a real slow burn, but I'd like to think it pays off if somebody can stick around. But like that self-awareness is a tool in the end
Yes.
to be able to do that. But I find that most people are not self-aware. So
No.
then they don't know how much their own influence is, whether it's influence about themselves or to be able to influence other people. Because
Mhm.
thinking about, trying to take this a little bit back to like a clinical aspect of being that person, that clinician who is able to navigate challenging, quote unquote, situations, not necessarily with ease from a comfort perspective, but just being like, okay, now I need to shift gears. We're now into this category that is a little bit more uncomfortable, but very meaningful and is going to
Yes.
pay us dividends as far as enriching the relationships, not only with this family or this patient, but with the team, if we all are brave enough to sit in this person's vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And not make it about us, but just sit there and learn and go, whew, wow, what a gift that
Mhm.
is to be able to then add that experience to my catalog, not in an ego-driven way, but just in a, where could I see this in other people? And you have to
Yeah.
role model what that looks like. You
Mhm.
have to show clinicians across any level of experience, because it's not just a hierarchy and experience here, because you have people that have deeply experienced that never learned this skill,
Right.
right? So you have to be the example of, well, what happens if we sit in this for a second? What
Right.
happens if we allow this person to have their emotions, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
What could we learn, and what more clinical insight even could we have into this dynamic that could
Yeah.
benefit everybody in making stronger decisions?
Right. Our world is like so obsessed with distractions. Thinking about, if you go from social media and stuff and all of those things that keep me outside of my head, outside of my heart, capitalism, buying all these things. I think I need all of these things, and all of these other things outside of me will make me happier. But at the end of the day, right? I mean, it really is. It's coming back home, coming back into yourself and rediscovering who you are. And then all of these distractions become less powerful, I think, because you reground yourself in what you know is really important. Yourself, your joy, your connections, your relationships, and all those other kinds of things. So there's, I don't know, the older I get, the more insight I think I have, not to be patting myself on the back, it's like kind of a day late and a dollar short, but um, that all of this external stuff is really just a facade, that what I really need and what I really hope my own children and my grandchildren will discover is what they need is to feel good in their own skin, find the joy that lies within and within the relationships that they create in those circles. And pretty sure it's not just my family that would find, happiness in that. I feel like, the larger human race, is that the right word? would find joy in that too. So but yeah, coming back to that reality, um, can feel daunting. People, feel frightening, right? I don't want to go back inside, maybe I've got some dark stories in there that I am not really prepared to re-engage with, or metabolize and stuff. So it's all of these different things. But I think you're right. At the end of the day, I mean, you're just such a brilliant role model, Jessi, in your vulnerability and your authenticity. I mean, to just put it right out there. Yep, I'm a slow burn. Yep, I'm on my, this is my new therapist, and this is just you normalize the things that should be normal, right? I mean, we're all trying to find ourselves and find our balance and find our joy. And I think that's almost your superpower, if I can be so bold as to say that.
Well, you're kind, but I just think if we talked more about what is needed to have a human experience, then people might embrace it more
Yeah,
instead of internalizing that something's wrong with me because I need
yeah,
support. Something's wrong with me because I'm not, able to just turn it on like, all of these influencers or anybody
yeah.
else seems to do because those people can't do it either,
Mm,
right? And there's always been some version of that, like when I was growing up, it was talk show hosts and celebrities. And, like there's always been something
yeah.
to say, well, why can't I just be George Clooney or whoever? Right. And you're
Yeah,
like, well, I mean, that person also struggles, right, in their own way. Now they intersect with a little more privilege than Jesse Barnes does, but like they're able to navigate the system probably a little bit easier in some ways, but also
mm,
more
yeah,
difficult in some ways. So it's like realizing that there's just so much more nuance to being a person than I think we've been sold over
yeah,
the years. Um, and I think, especially in fields like medicine, that is just built on a hierarchy where
yeah.
you think you've just achieved a level. And you're like, right, but you're never really done. We talk a lot
Mm,
about being lifelong learners, but that's really for a very specific lens.
yeah.
It's not for all the other parts. I remember telling my kids this week, because we're on spring break. So, Lord, it's
Uh,
been a journey, right? And I remember telling them, like, we're going to the gym. It's a 15-minute drive. You don't need an iPad to do that. And they're like, but mom, what am I going to do? And I was like, well, baby, you're going to be bored, and that's okay. And he was like, bored? And I was like, being bored is good for your brain. And he was like, no, being happy is good for your brain. I was like, no, no, no. You're not meant to be happy all the time. You're not meant to constantly be receiving dopamine hits. Like
yeah,
we can find curiosity and energy and life experience in other places.
yeah.
So we went to the gym twice with no iPads, and you
Oh,
would have thought that I'm like on a list somewhere for not letting it happen.
CTS.
But
like,
then
oh my gosh.
out of the mouth of babes, my 5-year-old was like, "This was kind of nice. Can we do this more often?" And I was like, "Well, maybe." I was like, "I think that would be a lovely idea." And he was like, "But not to grandma's house because my grandma lives in Nashville. It's a 4-hour drive." And he was like, "I need it for that." And I was like, "We can be reasonable." Okay.
That's hilarious. That's awesome.
But I think
That's
we've
awesome.
robbed like generations of people
Yeah,
of the ability to just be uncomfortable, even if it's just the minor discomfort of boredom,
yeah.
you know? That then links back to creativity and socialization and
Hmm,
community and
hmm,
reaching out and like it all
hmm.
is interconnected. But when
Yeah,
you give a pacifier, for the lack of a less demeaning term, like it there, well, why do I need that? You know?
yeah,
And I do think those tools have their place, just like a
yes,
lot of things. It's just like looking at
yeah.
it as a tool belt and use the tool that's best fit for the job. I don't think we have to deny people access to technology and things like that. And I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes those weird carpet cleaning videos are just satisfying and are fun. And you're like, I don't know why this exists, but I kind of like it right now. But that doesn't mean we have to be all consumed by it.
Exactly.
I think that goes back to kind of trying to marry what you and Mary both said, right? Like you said something along the lines of, I know I'm too much, I say I'm too much, right? Why? Why do we do that about ourselves?
Hmm.
Right. And so it made me think when Mary was talking, as you get older, you're just like, whatever, this is just who I am. Right. And people talk all the time about, older adults. You think the grandmothers and the grandfathers and the great grandmas and grandfathers, right? They say whatever they think. They don't care
Hmm.
what anybody else says about them. This is just what it is. I had one look at me one day and she's like, "Baby, your hair is a mess." And I was like, "I'm sorry." Right? But she just said what she thought, could care less if she hurt my feelings. It was honest. And so I think society as a whole has made us think that we have to be this certain type of whatever. So I would argue back to you, Jessi, and say, no, you're not too much. You're a
Mm.
Jessi. And that is just who you are,
Yeah.
right? And you can take it, you can leave it, but it's me, it's who
Yeah.
I am. And I think we are forced to mold ourselves into this idea of what we should be instead
Yeah.
of I'm me, right? I know because I know you. You never would step out to intentionally hurt
Mm.
someone, but you're going to say what you're going to say. And again, take it or leave it, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, 99.9% of the time, at least coming out of my mouth, it's true. It may not always be kind, but it's true.
Yeah.
And so I'm
Yeah.
just speaking what I'm speaking. And I
Yeah.
think that we need to get more comfortable with that part of owning who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that then goes back to us being able to step out, make those moves, and say, I understand they're not going to like this, but I'm going to step out and do it because it's what
Yes.
I believe in. And
Right.
it is with best intentions,
Yeah.
never trying to hurt anyone, but this is who I am.
Mhm.
Yeah, it
I
made
love
me,
that.
when you said that, it made me think of the kind of Brene Brown concept of clear and kindness, right? Like
Yeah.
to be kind is not to hide, it's not to coddle, it's not
Yeah.
to meet the emotional needs first, right? To be kind is to be clear, to make sure
Yes.
expectations are clearly communicated from a place of empathy. You don't have to be rude.
Mhm.
Again,
Yeah.
life is just not lived in binaries, despite what everybody will tell you. Like everything is a
Right.
spectrum, you know?
Yeah.
So you but really, if you have an expectation that is a reasonable, well, then speak it, right?
Yes.
Because, and this is true no matter where you're talking about, whether you're talking about clinical
Mhm.
relationships or interpersonal relationships or parent child, like if their expectation exists, then to have any reasonable ability that is going to be completed, it needs to be spoken out loud.
Yes.
Now, because you could sit there and passive aggressively be all angry and full of resentment and why don't they just know? Well, nobody knows, right?
No.
Like you have to communicate. You have to
Hmm.
role model what that looks like. I mean, even just think of your resuscitation algorithms. One of the first thing they say is assign roles and expectations, right? So it's like, you know that I'm over
Yeah.
here, I'm med nurse. I'm going to assist with lines. I'm going to help with airway. So then everybody
Yeah.
knows what everybody's doing so that it improves not only the way the team functions, but how each individual person feels in that team, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the outcome of the clinical situation. But if we don't acknowledge that we have a gap, and this is one of the ways, at least I think we could maybe close that gap, then we just keep ending up circling, over and over around the same
Yeah.
conversation, and you end up developing that learned helplessness. Well, I
Yeah.
can't fix it, so what's the point?
Right.
Right?
Right. Oh
And
my
you're
God.
like, but why not? Why not give it a shot? Why not
Yeah.
try?
Oh my God, I freaking love what you're saying. You know what you're making me think of, both of you guys in your conversation. I think it was Mia who kind of talked about this, the difference between nice and kind. Um, and that and I'd never thought of it this way, but it is so true that in our efforts to be nice, we're actually anything but, and there are all these weird ulterior motives and all this other kind of stuff because we're obfuscating our authenticity. We're not really showing up versus when we make efforts to be kind. I mean, that comes from a good place. It's action, it's authentic, it's even integrous. Even if my kindness hurts your heart a little bit, that's not where I was going. I'm sharing information with you that is important for me to communicate to you. So if your hair looks kind of crazy to me today, I want you to know, just like if you have spinach in your teeth, I want you to know I'm not going to be nice and not say it because I don't want to embarrass you, because what I'm actually setting you up for is more expansive embarrassment as everybody else in the neighborhood sees the spinach in your teeth. So I love this conversation because what I'm trying to do when I prioritize kindness is to be clear, right? I mean, and it just really kind of evolves from there. And I'm actually empowering you. And you can see that I am authentically kind and caring for you, even though it makes you feel kind of icky in the moment. That will pass, and you will realize she really does care about me, because now I don't have spinach in my teeth when I go into that next meeting, or whatever whatever the situation is. So yeah, yeah. And as goofy as it is, it's that you need to be courageous. I mean, the courage isn't just the superhero moments. Yes, it is, but courage is a myriad of little tiny incremental interactions where you lean in and you help someone else, kind of show up better, be better, feel better, all of the things. It's just, yeah, I love these conversations, you guys.
I do too. And it's one of those, like, it fills our cup, so hopefully it like adds a little bit to somebody else's cup kind of, mentality. Cause it's, yeah, like the courage, I think is one of the positive ways to lean it, right? Because yes, it's uncomfortable, but also you're showing a strength that is not only going to say, I don't love this, right? This doesn't feel abundantly great for me, but I respect this relationship, whatever it is, enough that I'm willing to be uncomfortable. And I'm also willing to help you figure out, what do you need to be able to meet this expectation, right? Because it's not just barking orders and walking away. It's saying, hey, I really need this thing to happen. What resources do you need to be able to do it? Do you need a mentor? Do you need like physical resources? Do you need time? Like, what could we actually do to be able to achieve this? So it's not just like, I'm putting this all on your shoulders so it's not on mine. It's actually strengthening the connection between two individuals or two relationships to say, we need to do this. So I'm going to bring this up, and then you let me know how I can best help and partner with you through this.
Yeah.
Tracy's mentioned this a bunch of times before, the like, I'm going to pull you up. I'm going to pull you up by your hands, and we're going to do this together. Kind of just what we've mentioned even in this episode of like, no, we are going to walk across that stage, right? Like, it might say your name on those certificates, but in the end, that everybody else is standing in the shadows cheering you on, and maybe even empowering in a way that doesn't feel comfortable, holding you accountable, right? It's my obsession with accountability, right? Of like, accountability doesn't have to mean punishment. It doesn't have to mean something bad. It's really just saying, you can do this.
Yeah.
I know you can do this. It doesn't seem like you can do it. So how can we get to that point, right? So that all of those things can be achieved. Because then everybody is enriched by that experience. The relationship is enriched, the community is enriched, the individuals are enriched. Like, it's kind of a no-lose situation, even though you have to navigate some discomfort to do it. Timeless Topics is Jessi Barnes, Tracey Bell, and Mary Coughlin. It is produced by Jessi Barnes and music from Carlos Bell. The thoughts and opinions shared here are those of the individual speakers and do not reflect the official policy or position for any of the speakers' employers or any other affiliated individual or entity.